In the grey pre-dawn of 13th February 1692, the snowy silence of Glencoe was shattered by musket fire and screams. Neighbours who had shared bread and whiskey the night before turned into assassins at first light. The Glencoe Massacre, one of Scotland's most infamous tragedies, unfolded as an act of calculated betrayal under the guise of Highland hospitality. In this dramatic retelling, we journey through the political intrigues and human stories behind that fateful winter night in the Highlands. We'll meet the key figures caught in the deadly web: the proud MacDonald clan chief Alistair MacIan, his unsuspecting guests, led by Captain Robert Campbell, and King William III, whose government orchestrated the slaughter, and relive the suspense, betrayal, and heartbreak that have echoed through Scottish history ever since. To understand Glencoe's tragedy, we must first grasp the turbulent backdrop of late 17th century Scotland. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution toppled the Catholic King James VII of Scotland, also known as James II of England, and installed the Protestant William of Orange, William III, and Mary II as co-monarchs. Many Highland clans remained loyal to the exiled James, becoming Jacobites. These Jacobites viewed William and Mary as usurpers and rose in rebellion in 1689, winning a brief victory at Killiecrankie before suffering defeats at Dunkeld and Cromdale. By 1691, the government in Edinburgh, backed by William, sought to pacify the Highlands through a mix of bribery and threats. The Crown issued a proclamation offering a pardon to all Highland clans who swore an oath of allegiance to William and Mary by 1st January 1692, and threatened the utmost extremity of the law for those who failed to comply. This oath was a political tightrope for clan chiefs. Swearing loyalty to William meant renouncing James VII, their traditional king. Nevertheless, under pressure and promised £12,000 in compensation, most chiefs agreed to submit. Alistair MacIan, chief of the MacDonalds of Glencoe, waited until the last days of the deadline, hoping for a sign of a Jacobite revival. When none came, he journeyed through blizzard and mountain passes to take the oath. Tragically, administrative hurdles delayed him. Arriving at Fort William on 31st of December 1691, MacIan was told he must travel onward to Inverary to swear before the sheriff there. Battling snowstorms, it took him until 6th of January to formally pledge allegiance, technically missing the deadline by just a few days. Those few days' delay would seal Glencoe's fate. In Edinburgh, Sir John Dalrymple, Master of Stair and Secretary of State for Scotland, seized on MacIan's lapse as the perfect excuse to make an example of a clan. Dalrymple harboured a deep contempt for the lawless Highland clans, and especially the MacDonalds, whom he called that damnable subsect of the Highlands. When informed that MacIan of Glencoe had missed the oath, Dalrymple chillingly wrote, "At which I rejoice. It is a great work of charity to be exact in rooting out that damnable sept, the worst of the Highlands." The wheels of conspiracy began to turn. Over the winter of 1691 to 92, Dalrymple coordinated with military commanders to devise a punitive strike that would extirpate, root out, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, not just punish the chief, but wipe out the entire clan as a warning to others. Far away in London, King William III was informed of the plan in broad strokes. On 11th of January 1692, William signed orders authorizing the use of force against those Highland clans who had not proven their loyalty. "You are hereby ordered and authorized to march our troops by fire and sword, and all manner of hostility, to burn their houses, seize or destroy their goods or cattle," he commanded. It's unclear if William knew the intended target was specifically Glencoe, or that the operation would involve such treachery, but his signature, and thus royal sanction, lay upon the orders that would soon bring death to the valley of Glencoe. The stage was set for a massacre, couched in legal authority, yet fueled by political calculation and personal vendetta.
Alistair MacKeen,
MacDonald of Glencoe. The aging chieftain of the MacDonalds of Glencoe, often referred to by officials as the Old Fox. A proud man of about 60, MacKeen had reluctantly sworn allegiance to King William, albeit a few days past the deadline. Unbeknownst to him, that minor delay marked him and his people for destruction. Contemporary accounts describe MacKeen as a stately, well-favoured man and of good courage and sense. On the eve of the massacre, he played the gracious host to government soldiers in his home, ensuring they were well entertained, tragically unaware that he and his clan had been singled out for slaughter. Captain Robert Campbell of Glen Lyon, a 60-year-old veteran officer of the Earl of Argyll's regiment of foot tasked with carrying out the attack on Glencoe. Captain Campbell came from Clan Campbell, long-time rivals of the MacDonalds, and he nursed personal grievances. MacKeen's men had allegedly raided Campbell's lands and stolen his cattle a few years prior. By a twist of fate, Campbell's own niece was married to one of MacKeen's sons, making his role in the massacre even more bitterly ironic. Described by witnesses as a somewhat uneasy guest, Campbell led roughly 120 soldiers into Glencoe, accepting the MacDonalds' hospitality for nearly 2 weeks, while secretly awaiting orders to strike. His name, Campbell of Glen Lyon, would be cursed in Scottish memory as a byword for treachery. Sir John Dalrymple, Master of Stair, King William's Chief Minister for Scottish Affairs, and the principal architect of the massacre. Dalrymple was determined to crush the Highland clan's independence. He saw MacIan's late oath as good fortune and gleefully ordered that the Clan Donald of Glencoe be rooted out, utterly. From his desk in Edinburgh, Dalrymple issued letters to military commanders, urging secret and sudden destruction of targeted clans. His cold-blooded instructions, for example, destroy entirely the country of Lochaber, Glencoe, their chieftains all being papists, it is well the vengeance falls there, reveal the merciless mindset behind the operation. Though Dalrymple did not swing a sword in Glencoe, his pen signed the death warrants of innocents, making him one of history's chief villains in this tragedy. King William III, William of Orange, the reigning King of Scotland, England and Ireland, who had a strategic interest in pacifying Scotland. William's primary focus was a larger war in Europe, but unrest in the Scottish Highlands threatened the stability of his regime. He approved tough measures to enforce the oath of allegiance, even signing off on severe reprisals against defaulters. In the Glencoe case, William's exact knowledge is debated. Later, he would claim that he never intended a massacre of innocents, only a crackdown on resistors. Still, it was his government and his signature that empowered the butchery in Glencoe. To Jacobites and many Scots, William III would forever be stained by the blood spilled under his rule, earning him scornful epithets and fueling distrust of the crown. In late January 1692, winter snows blanketed the rugged mountain passes of Glencoe. Nevertheless, a company of approximately 120 British soldiers, all from Argyll's regiment, a unit drawn from the Campbell clan's territory, marched into the narrow valley. At their head rode Captain Robert Campbell of Glen Lyon, carrying orders that his men be given free quarter among the local populace. Officially, they claimed to be there to collect overdue taxes, a common practice to billet troops upon taxpayers instead of burdening the army's coffers. The MacDonalds of Glencoe, though traditional enemies of the Campbells, felt they had little choice but to welcome these red-coated visitors. After all, Chief MacIan had now sworn loyalty to King William. What better way to prove his newfound allegiance than to show hospitality to the king's men? Thus, the soldiers were invited into the MacDonalds' homes, each household taking in a few men at a time. So began nearly 2 weeks of an uneasy but outwardly cordial coexistence. The Highland Code of Hospitality, ancient and sacrosanct, ensured that guests under one's roof would be treated with the utmost kindness and expected to do no harm to their hosts. The MacDonalds shared their meager winter provisions with the soldiers, who in turn joined in daily life at the glen. By many accounts, the lines between guest and host blurred during those days. There were stories of the men playing shinty, a Highland game, together on the snow-packed fields, of evening ceilidhs, gatherings with music and dancing, and even whispers of romances blooming between some soldiers and local girls. Captain Campbell himself was a familiar figure at Chief McKeon's hearth. Being McKeon's distant relation by marriage, he seemed especially friendly. One popular anecdote holds that on the night of the 12th of February 1692, Campbell sat playing cards and drinking ale with McKeon's two sons, laughing and chatting as a raging blizzard blew outside. If Campbell felt any inner torment about the orders he was expecting, he hid it well beneath a genial facade. Yet, beneath this warm veneer, a deadly tension simmered. Unknown to the MacDonald villagers, a secret letter had arrived for Captain Campbell on 12th February. Sometime that evening, possibly after the card game, Campbell excused himself and met with his junior officers in private. There, by flickering candlelight, he broke the seals on Major Robert Duncanson's orders, revealing the horrific task due before dawn. The orders were explicit and merciless. You are hereby ordered to fall upon the rebels, the MacDonalds of Glencoe, and put all to the sword under 70. You are to have a special care that the old fox and his sons do upon no account escape your hands. You are to secure all the avenues, that no man escape. This is by the King's special command, for the good and safety of the country, that these miscreants be cut off, root and branch. Captain Campbell's blood must have run cold as he read those words. He knew that the old fox referred to his host, Alastair McKeon, and that he was being ordered to massacre the very people who had shown him and his men nothing but kindness. The letter even threatened that if he showed feud or favor, in other words, if he flinched, he himself would be judged not true to king nor government and unfit to serve. In essence, Campbell was trapped, bound by duty to carry out a heinous betrayal or face ruin and dishonor. Obedience meant murdering men, women, and children who, at that very moment, might have been singing songs by the fireside or asleep under their own roofs, trusting in his good faith. Outside, the Highland winter howled. Unbeknownst to the MacDonalds, additional troops of Argyll's regiment had moved into positions at either end of the glen. 400 soldiers under Lieutenant Colonel James Hamilton to the north at Kinlochleven, and another 400 under Major Duncanson ready to sweep in from the south. These forces, delayed by the fierce storm, had orders to converge at the same hour and seal off all escape routes. The net had been drawn tight around Glencoe, and the final night of peace, a false peace in the valley, drew to its end.
In the dark early hours of 13th February 1692, the soldiers of Argyll's regiment rose from their host families' hearths and quietly readied their weapons. The signal to strike was set for 5 a.m. on the dot. One can imagine the dreadful stillness in those moments before, as some of Campbell's men hesitated, grappling with their conscience. According to later legends, a Campbell piper deliberately played a mournful tune, a lament, as a covert warning, and a few sympathetic soldiers muttered cryptic alerts to their hosts or even urged a favorite family dog to run off into the night, hoping the alarmed owners might follow. Indeed, it is said that 2 officers had already refused the assignment outright and were removed from duty prior to the massacre. But these mercy tales live in the hazy space between fact and folklore. What is certain is that many soldiers did carry out their orders with ruthless efficiency when the appointed time came. At 5 a.m., Captain Campbell's contingent, and other small detachments across the glen began their bloody work. In 3 hamlets, Invercoe, Inverrigan, and Achnacoin, and in isolated farmsteads up and down Glencoe, the murders commenced almost simultaneously. The MacDonalds were taken completely by surprise in their own homes. Having accepted the soldiers as comrades, they had no guards posted, and many were still asleep in their beds when the killing started. Shots exploded in the pre-dawn gloom. Flames soon licked at thatched roofs as the soldiers torched cottages. Men were dragged from their beds and slain before their families. One contemporary account seethes with horror at the betrayal. They had been all received as friends by those poor people, who, intending no evil themselves, little suspected that their guests were designed to be their murderers. At 5 o'clock in the morning, they began their bloody work. Chief Alistair McKean was one of the first targets. The old chieftain was in his bedclothes when soldiers burst into his chamber. According to a later report, McKean was in the very act of dressing and calmly giving instructions to a servant to ensure the soldiers were well cared for that morning, when a musket shot hit him. McKean was killed as he was drawing on his breeches, while he was speaking of the good entertainment of those who murdered him. He was shot through the head and fell dead in his lady's arms, reads the anguished account. His wife saw him die and, as the story goes, died of grief the next day. Elsewhere in the glen, a boy of about 8 years old reportedly clung to Captain Campbell's legs, crying for mercy and offering to serve him for life, only for one Lieutenant Drummond to stab the child with a dagger, killing him on the spot. No rank of victim was spared. Another anecdote speaks of a bedridden old man of 80 who was first shot, then bayoneted to death as he lay helpless. One MacDonald clansman, attempting to flee, was beaten and left for dead, only to revive and crawl into a cottage, which the soldiers then set on fire, burning him alive. The massacre was brief in duration, but savage in impact. By the time the sun's first rays touched the peaks above Glencoe, at least 38 MacDonald clanspeople lay dead. The official tally, given later, was 38 murdered, though the MacDonalds believed the number of immediate dead was around 25. Modern historians estimate roughly 30 were killed outright. This included most adult men found in the glen, and possibly a few women and children caught in indiscriminate violence. Dozens more, perhaps 40 or more, would perish in the aftermath, not by bullet or blade, but by the cruel exposure to the elements. As soldiers set fire to homes and seized livestock, they cast the MacDonald women, children, and elderly out into a howling snowstorm, effectively condemning them to death by hypothermia. A Jacobite pamphleteer later shuddered at the thought of poor stripped children and women, some with child and some giving suck, wrestling against a vehement storm in mountains and heaps of snow, at length to be overcome and fall down and die miserably. Glencoe's high corries and passes became graveyards for these fleeing families, their bodies later found half buried in snowdrifts. It is important to note that not all the soldiers found the heart to carry through the slaughter. There are numerous accounts of individual acts of compassion, or at least reluctance. Stories emerged of men who deliberately fired their muskets over the heads of fleeing MacDonalds, or who knocked loudly on doors before entering, effectively warning the occupants to escape out the back. 2 soldiers of Campbell's detachment at the northern end reportedly broke their swords rather than proceed with killing their hosts. Captain Robert Campbell himself, despite his infamy, was later said to have quietly allowed 2 young MacDonald men to slip away unharmed. Indeed, the question of how did so many MacDonalds escape became a point of discussion.
In all, perhaps half of the clan members present survived the ordeal by fleeing, a fact which some attributed to soldiers' covert mercy or the providential delay of the additional troops who were slowed by the blizzard. Had Hamilton's 400 soldiers arrived on time to seal the northern exit, nearly 200 MacDonald men under age 70, the entire male population of the Glen, would have been killed as planned. The storm that raged that night, lamentable though it was for the refugees, likely prevented an even larger massacre by keeping those reinforcements at bay until after many had escaped. As it was, all the houses in Glencoe were put to the torch, and about 900 cattle and horses and hundreds of sheep and goats were stolen by the troops as plunder. When the smoke cleared and the redcoats marched away, Glencoe was a smouldering wasteland of charred huts and frozen corpses. The very name of this massacre entered the Gaelic language as Murtnach Glencoe, the murder of Glencoe, forever signifying the worst betrayal imaginable. It was murder under trust, a heinous breach of the sacred Highland hospitality code that shocked even a land inured to clan feuds. As a Scottish historian later put it, people thought the thieving tribe, the MacDonalds, perhaps deserved to be destroyed, but that it should have been done by those quartered amongst them makes a great noise. In other words, even those with little love for the MacDonalds were appalled at the perfidy of striking them as guests in their homes. This phrase, slaughter under trust, or murder under trust, originally a 16th century legal term for killing a person who had been granted safe conduct or hospitality, became forever linked with Glencoe. To this day, the massacre remains emblematic of betrayal in its basest form. News of the atrocity in Glencoe spread slowly at first. In the immediate weeks after February 1692, the government in Edinburgh kept a lid on the affair. There was little official mention of the massacre. In fact, it appears there were attempts at a cover-up. The commanding officer at Fort William, Colonel John Hill, reported to his superiors in understated terms, "I have also ruined Glencoe, old Glencoe and others being killed. Their houses are to the fire. I hope this example of justice and severity upon Glencoe will be enough." These cold words suggest that the perpetrators considered the operation a grim success, a piece of justice and severity to cow the Highlands. For a time, it seemed the massacre might remain a dark secret of the Glen. However, whispers of the deed began to circulate. Soldiers from Argyll's regiment, now redeployed to other duties, spoke of what had happened. Crucially, a copy of the written orders for the massacre, the one delivered to Glenlyon, found its way into the public domain. One story claims it was accidentally left behind in an Edinburgh tavern, found and forwarded to France, where the Paris Gazette published it in April 1692. Jacobite agents pounced on the propaganda opportunity. By the spring of 1692, pamphlets condemning the murder of Glencoe appeared in Edinburgh and even London. One particularly scathing pamphlet titled Gallienus Redivivus, or Murder Will Out, was penned by Jacobite writer Charles Leslie, who framed Glencoe as evidence of King William's barbarity. Public sentiment in Scotland rapidly turned to outrage. The idea that government troops had turned on their hosts, killing women, children, and elderly under trust, was intolerable to Scottish society. The Campbell name also came in for vilification. Although only a dozen of the 120 soldiers were actually Campbells by blood, and they acted under orders, popular rumor painted the massacre as a treacherous Campbell plot against their MacDonald neighbors. This seed of a clan feud narrative would later grow into a full-blown myth, but more on that later. Facing mounting pressure, the Scottish government was forced to act. In 1695, 3 years after the massacre, the new Scottish Parliament, by then more dominated by William's political opponents, set up a commission of inquiry to investigate Glencoe. MacIan's surviving sons and other witnesses gave testimony recounting the ghastly details. The commission's findings, delivered in June 1695, were damning. It concluded that the Glencoe killings constituted murder, Specifically, it was murder under trust, an aggravated crime under Scottish law, indeed considered treason since hospitality had been violated. The commission did not mince words about the role of Secretary Dalrymple, Master of Stair, whose signed letters plainly showed he harbored intent to exterminate the clan. It also laid blame on the local commanders, particularly Major Duncanson and Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton, for exceeding the bounds of their duty. However, the commission trod carefully around the question of King William's culpability. After all, William was still the reigning monarch. In a diplomatic sidestep, the report suggested that the king's instructions for punishing defiers of the oath had been interpreted overzealously by his ministers. William himself claimed he never meant for such a slaughter to occur, effectively blaming Dalrymple and others for turning his orders into a massacre.
In practical terms, justice was elusive. The Scottish Parliament, after hearing the Commission's report, recommended that Dalrymple be removed from office and the other officers be punished. King William acted by accepting Dalrymple's resignation. The Master of Stair was sacrificed as the political scapegoat and retired in disgrace in 1695. Notably, Dalrymple's fall from grace was temporary. A few years later, under Queen Anne, he would be rehabilitated and even elevated to an earldom. A bitter reminder that the architects of Glencoe never truly paid for their crimes. As for Campbell of Glenlyon and his direct superiors, none faced formal punishment. Major Duncanson had already left Scotland for Flanders and later died in battle abroad. Captain Robert Campbell continued his military career. He was shunned by many, and some say he died of shame in 1696 as a drunken, destitute man in Bruges. King William, for his part, escaped direct blame, thanks to political maneuvering and his own insistence that he'd been misled. He expressed only mild regret, and no reparations or apologies were offered to the MacDonald survivors. The clan's formal petition for compensation for their burned homes and lost property was ignored. The survivors of Glencoe had no choice but to rebuild their lives as best as they could. A few returned to the charred glen and erected new huts on the ashes of the old. Others settled with relatives elsewhere. Remarkably, the Glencoe MacDonalds endured and even participated in later Jacobite uprisings, undeterred in their loyalty to the Stuart cause despite the Crown's treachery. If the intended effect of the massacre was to terrorize the Highlands into submission, it largely backfired. Instead of splitting the clans or cowing them, the slaughter of Glencoe became a rallying cry. Highland Scots of various clans, even those historically at odds with Clan Donald, were aghast at the government's cruelty. The massacre underscored a belief that the Scottish Highlands were being treated with contempt by an English-dominated government, deepening resentment. Jacobite sympathies only grew stronger. Decades later, during the Jacobite Rising of 1745, the young pretender Prince Charles Edward Stuart made sure that printed accounts of the Glencoe Massacre were circulated anew to stoke the fires of rebellion. The spectre of Glencoe thus directly fed into the next generations of conflict. In the long view of history, Glencoe became a symbol of Scottish victimization and clan honor. One more grievance, alongside others like the brutal Highland clearances and the failed Darien scheme, fueling the narrative of a proud people wronged by distant, unfeeling rulers. Finally, Glencoe stands today as a place of pilgrimage. Amid the grandeur of its mountains, the Three Sisters of Glencoe, the towering Bucca Itivimor, there is a simple stone memorial cross dedicated to the victims of the massacre. Visitors leave flowers and clan tartans there in remembrance of the MacDonalds who died. The inscription, in Gallican English, ensures none forget the crime committed under trust in that valley. For Scotland, Glencoe remains a somber symbol, a reminder of the potential for cruelty when political power tramples moral duty.
and of the Highland virtues of loyalty and hospitality that were so cruelly betrayed. Every year, on chilly February nights, candles are lit in cottage windows in the Highlands to honor the dead of Glencoe, small beacons of memory flickering against the darkness of the past.
The Glencoe Massacre was more than a Highland tragedy. It was a betrayal written in blood, where trust and hospitality were shattered in the snow. More than 300 years later, the silence of Glencoe still whispers of that dark February morning. And while the clans rebuilt, the memory of that treachery lives on, a reminder of how fragile honor can be when power demands cruelty.